Hey, welcome to another episode of Rock, Paper, and Hand Grenades. Today, Matt, you're all right, by the way. I gotta tell you that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't mean it. I'm a politician. I don't have to actually mean what I say. I just have to say it sincerely.
Right, right. Yeah, that's very
Speaking
sincere.
of politicians.
By the way, your shirt matches this part of the hand grenade.
Yeah, I know.
Was that intentional?
Oh, yeah.
That's
Oh,
impressive.
yeah,
That's
that's the
good.
kind of guy I am.
Yeah, all right.
Coordinated armaments.
Today we have for a guest, we have Representative John Heichel again, because he wanted to come back because he had such wicked good time last
I
time.
like Manchester a lot.
And he likes Manchester a lot. I think he's going to run for Tsar of Manchester or something. I don't know what the heck the deal is, but
Never know.
you never. You're right. You don't. You don't.
You don't know.
Do we have a czar?
Well, you need one.
Yes, yeah, well, obviously,
need-
yeah. We need lots of czars.
Yes.
Yes.
More. They need more czars. And with us today is
leave that right alone.
next to him we have Speaker William O'Brien, Speaker of the New Hampshire House, my mentor, which doesn't say much for him, but he's here today.
Gary, thank you for having me, but actually it's the opposite. You're my mentor.
Your
That's sad.
Your mic is a little, yeah, if you can just get it.
That's
That's
pretty.
better,
If
thank
that's
you.
the case, that's sad.
Oh.
I really, I know me better than most. And I just tell you, I told John before this, I actually had you on here to open up a can of whoop ass on you. Actually,
Nice.
yeah, because you guys have not. You said in your thing about how you were trying to invest in green energies and stuff like that, and I have the best program in where I'm trying to get it off the ground. I can't get any money for the state for it.
Oh.
It's an awesome idea. I started the prototype last year. It's called Igloos for the Elderly. What we do is next to the elderly person's house, we dig a very deep pit, and they take the food scraps throughout the year, maybe like a dead hamster and stuff like that, and put it in the pit. And as it decays, we siphon off some of the methane gas. And then when winter comes, we put an igloo on top of it where they stay through the winter to reduce their heating bill. So that they're actually, the decaying mass underneath actually warms the igloo, and we have a little solar panel so they get free light. But we did the prototype last year.
Yes, yes.
And the first one,
We
Have you thought of going to California?
no,
with this
anyway, no,
idea?
wait.
we are redistricting in 2012.
Yeah, you're not.
Fortunately enough.
No, so anyway.
Gary's a pioneer. You hear him out. This is
Oh
brilliant.
yeah, no, yeah. Some people are worried about thinking outside the box. I've never seen
Ooh,
the
look at
box.
that. Look at that.
Whoa, what?
We've never had that before. The
Oh, we
split
got
screen. huh?
split
Huh?
screen. Wow.
Thinking outside the
High
igloo.
tech.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did this last year. We had the prototype in Ware, and we dug the thing. We put the igloo on there. The insulation was great. The heating bill was down to $50 a month for that couple, the elderly couple in Ware, until February, where it got cut short. I forgot to tell them not to throw lit cigarettes down the John, and
You got to remember the details, Gary.
Yeah.
That's the
but
thing.
they were Democrats, so it's all right. But anyway, I can't get any money for these great ideas I have, and I don't know what to do about that.
No, that's not going to get into the budget, Gary. But have you thought of going and trying to get a grant out of some federal stimulus funds?
Oh, I need stimulus. I'll tell you that.
Well, that's for another show, Gary. That's,
yeah,
that's,
yeah, we have to do that later on.
Yeah, no,
That's
yeah.
after 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Anyway, at this part of the show, usually I like people to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about yourself, so that they, because like for instance, right now, Speaker O'Brien, they've heard so much about you. They're probably surprised that you don't have horns.
Well, the editing's
I know you
pretty
had
good.
them. I know you had them ground off before the show, but I'm just saying.
He is cloven hoofed, though.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, sure. But tell a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this. I know you used to actually do stuff for money, and now you're.
I'm a lawyer by trade, and
That's
and
not your fault. I mean, there's.
No, it's actually worked out fairly well.
Okay.
And spent a number of years either as partner at a firm that I started with some other folks, or as general counsel of a number of high-tech companies. And then at one point I thought I'd kick back and not be as involved in my career, so immediately I got on a school board and I ran for state rep.
Is that Mount Vernon? All in Mount Vernon?
All in Mount Vernon. I live in
Yeah.
Mount Vernon,
Yeah.
so I was on the school board there starting about 10 or 11 years ago. And then while I was on the school board, one of the members who was the state representative, a fellow named Tim Allen, who I think you know,
Yeah.
Gary, he decided after a term that his work didn't allow him to do it, and so he asked me to run, and ran in 2004 and kept on agitating, and finally people wanted me to get out of their meetings, so they made me speaker.
Very good.
Now, you won first, did you win your first time in 2004, or was
I
it
did.
2000? Really?
Yeah, 2004.
Okay, because that's the first year I lost.
Yeah, yeah. No,
voters
that's,
smartened up
that's the
and
reason I
says-
ran again.
Yeah, because I wasn't there.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That makes a
It
lot
all
of sense.
shakes out.
Yeah,
Right.
really, it does. So anyway,
And so I've been speaker since December,
yeah,
and yeah, we've come in and done quite a bit while we're there.
yep, that's kind of why I wanted you to talk about. There's a lot of cool stuff we've done. I got a list, and I can't read it because my eyes aren't good enough.
Do you want me to read any of that, or?
Oh yeah, you can if you want. Oh yeah, that was one thing, that the 11% reduction from last year's biennial budget,
Right.
and I think that hit the news, and it probably doesn't seem like a lot of money,
Yeah.
but when you combine it with the fact that we didn't get $900 million from federal stimulus money, from Obama money, like the Democrats did, and we also didn't borrow money like the Democrats did, that 11% is a lot greater an accomplishment than I think it may have been presented in the newspaper.
The actual dollar savings from what would have been necessary just to keep the budget flat funded was $1.2 billion.
Just in other words, if we didn't do anything, but just maintaining what they were doing would have been.
$1.2 billion more, which is a substantial amount of money. You know, politicians talk in terms of millions and billions, and I think for most of us, we lose sight of what it means to us individually. If we had tried to cover the deficit in state funding through more taxes, more fees, it'd be about $300 over the next 2 years per person in New Hampshire. Every man, woman, and child would go to them and say, give us $300 more in taxes. If we tried to increase the funding at the same rate as was the average over the last two budgets,
Right.
we'd have to go to every family of four and say, over the next 2 years, send in $3,000 more to the state of New Hampshire. We campaigned, as you know, Gary, in November 2010 with a promise that we just weren't going to increase taxes and fees any longer. There had been in excess of 100 increases over the past 4 years. And what we also promised is that we're going to budget responsibly. So we came up with realistic revenue estimates. We recognize that there's been a great loss of federal funding. That meant that there was going to be $1.2 billion left, and that's what we budgeted to.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people here probably don't get what goes on up in Concord, because I haven't been there a long time. I don't have a clue what goes on in Concord. I go up for the free food.
Yeah, yeah.
The
the lasagna.
The lasagna
Yeah,
last week, and the unions gave me hamburgers, and
Nice.
I'm still waiting for the speaker to offer me something like the cannolis and stuff, but that
Oh,
hasn't happened.
No, we cut the legislative budget 17.6%.
Yeah, which got
And
rid
so
of
the
the
cannolis,
cannolis.
the cannolis are gone now.
Cannolis are always the first to go.
I know.
They are.
I don't know
They are.
why. I
Yeah.
love cannolis.
Well,
But anyway, so yeah, it actually has been a lot of stuff you don't hear. Like, for instance, early on in this year, the Democrats were really complaining because our budget estimates were like, we took what we guessed were going to be the revenue estimates and then lowballed it, because that was safer for the taxpayers. If we guessed low and budgeted accordingly, there's less likelihood that we were going to end up having to scramble at the end at budget time when the
Right.
real numbers started coming in.
Yeah,
That
and-
turned out to be a really good idea, even though they gave us a lot of crap for it.
Right, and it's turned out to be correct. What we did was reverse the normal process in Concord. Normally what happens is that the Finance Committee gets together and says, how much do we want to spend? They come up with an ultimate figure. Then they go into Ways and Means and say, help us find the money. And that naturally drives a couple of things that aren't good. It drives tax increases and fees increases. It leads people in the end, members in the end, to say, Well, let's just be a little bit optimistic. Let's be very optimistic on these revenue estimates. We had a story from last term where the chairman of finance went into the Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee, again, is the one who finds the money, and said, look to the sky because we have such a big budget. This time we reversed it, and we said, no, we're going to figure out where we are. And where we're going to be, and then we're going to put a stake in the sand and say, that's it. That's it. We're not going to spend any more money than that. And, I think there were realistic estimates. We asked each of the agency heads to come in and say, tell us what's the increase is going to be, if at all, over the next 2 years. And, so they initially came in and said, well, it's going to be between 1% and 5%. We said, no. Pretend like your job is on the line. Pretend like it's private business, and
Let's pretend it matters.
yeah, pretend it matters. And so they generally came in about 2%, and we were just slightly under that, $350 million under where Governor Lynch, even disagreeing with his own agency heads, said they would be. And now we have a couple of months worth of actual revenues that come in. 1 month was a little bit lower than that. 1 month was a little bit higher than that. But it seems to be a realistic estimate. What's important about it is if we overestimate, that means that we're going to get out there after half the budget cycle's over and say, whoops, now we better do something. And it's either going to be more cuts or more taxes, and we're just intent on trying to have a stable, balanced budget that doesn't drive us into new taxing.
Yeah, I know the last year, I think this was the impetus for it, but I'm not positive, was they had overestimated revenue, and I believe that's how they got into trying to rob the doctors out of the money they had put aside.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
That's
I'm not
absolutely.
positive.
There's a foundation, a nonprofit called the Pew Center for the States, I think is the actual name of it. And they came up with a list earlier this calendar year and said, who are the worst states when it comes to estimating budgets? In the top 3 of the worst states was New Hampshire. We had overestimated on the average through the last couple of budget cycles by 12%. Curiously enough, when Governor Lynch came to us with his budget proposal, he proposes and then goes to the House and then it goes on to the Senate. It was about 12% over what we initially came up with. And that's exactly what happened as we got into this problem last time where because of the overestimates, they're searching for money, and they looked at the doctors' funds in the Joint Underwriting Association insurance plan and said, well, let's grab that as a convenient $125 million, and let's grab that. Court said, no, that's not your money.
Well, yeah, that for people that don't know, that's money that they were trying to get doctors to go out to some of the more rural areas up in the North Country and things like that, but the doctors couldn't do it because the malpractice liability was so high they couldn't make any money up there.
Oh, okay.
So the state helped them create a fund so that they could pool their money so that the malpractice insurance wouldn't be as so prohibitive.
Yeah.
And that was the money the doctors had put the money in, not the state.
Oh, okay.
But then the state said, well, we have a little bit of control over this. Let's take it while, get it while they're getting good.
Wow. So when you say they tried to rob the doctors of that money,
Well,
that's not hyperbole. They were literally
Yeah, they were
trying to rob them.
the doctors.
Wow.
Right. If you look at the ultimate decision by the New Hampshire Supreme Court, they said this is like a mutual company, and to the extent you have profits, they're supposed to go back to the policyholders. The doctors are the policyholders.
Yeah. Well, we have our first call of the day. Hi, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Who's this?
This is Bob.
Hi, Bob.
I wanted to ask a question
Please do.
I wanted to ask a question of these gentlemen that are on the TV right now.
Well, you came to the right place. Go ahead.
Question is, have any of these gentlemen ever gone to the soup kitchen to have a meal with the people? That's all I want to know.
Yes.
Nope.
Yes.
I haven't.
I have twice, once in Manchester and once in Nashville.
I have in the past as well, not recently, but in the past, and worked in the soup kitchen,
Yes.
a soup kitchen.
You worked in a soup kitchen?
Well, it was part of, as I was growing up and in my early adulthood, that's one of these little civic involvement I had was to work in some of these agencies.
Then I've brought clothes to the soup kitchen of the Manchester area, places that are in need.
So it must have been very rewarding to reach out to the people then.
I think it is. I think one of the geniuses of the American system, at least as it was in the past and as it was carried out in New Hampshire, is that we relied on ourselves and our family and our community to support ourselves, and we didn't turn to government as the first resort, but it was the last resort.
I think that Speaker O'Brien and I were talking before the show, and one of the things he pointed out was that as government has grown and taken responsibility more and more for different charitable organizations, people are putting less and less money into their churches and feeling less obligated to help out neighbors because the impression is the state's taking care of that. Why should I have to do that?
It's a startling comparison when you look at the charitable efforts in more socialistic oriented countries.
Well, yeah, no, charity is fine.
Yeah, but charity is
But, you know,
a function of free
You
markets.
give a man a meal for the day, and then that's it. Charities, that's all they do. They don't train people to move ahead in life.
Right.
And government does have a role, certainly in
Charities
education.
should have like a clearinghouse, or whatever. And people who donate to the charities, well, sometimes they donate to charities that really don't affect many people. It'd be nice to have a clearinghouse for charities.
And
So
in
that's
this,
where all the funds are distributed to where they are most needed.
you know, there's a phrase that often occurs to me when we're looking at various agencies and whether they're helping people ultimately or hurting them and creating dependency. And the phrase is, you know, you should give people a hand up but not a handout.
Right.
And the hand up certainly is very important in the area of education, you know, having a good public education system for our children, having strong community colleges to provide people skills to get jobs. You know, I think we might be in agreement that in the end, providing someone a meal and then sending them on the way may be less important than providing them the skills to earn money to buy their own meals.
That's where I stand. I guess we are in agreement, as you said. Bob, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
All right. Thank you for calling.
You know what I found was amazing when I ran for the House last time, this is my second term, when they talked about how a budget is made. And constitutionally, we're obligated to balance the budget every 2 years in New Hampshire. And that means that we can balance that budget, or the way it's been in the past, and especially in the past 4 years, was I want to say the past 4 years of the Democrat and probably Republican too leadership. That when they balance the budget, they balance it on anticipated revenue, and I never realized that they could actually make it, and that was part of that joke, that money you were talking about the malpractice fund.
Right.
And they go out there and they look, and this is what I gathered from it when I first saw it, was they're looking at money that may come in the future.
Or
They're
may
re-
not.
Or may not, but they're
yeah,
hoping.
it's
well,
all
they're saying that it's going to come in.
It's all a guesstimate, though, really.
It's all a guesstimate, but it's more than the money that they have on hand, and that's what the speaker really, the message that was put forward that I saw this year was that we are going to come up with a budget, a responsible budget, and we're going to spend the money that we actually have.
Right.
No, we're not going to be looking to the future for hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars
That may or may not.
that we may or may not come in. And I thought that was the most incredible way to make a budget. I remember.
Look how tempting it can be. You put together a budget that ultimately won't end until after the next election. So it's really tempting, and too many legislators in the past have succumbed to the temptation to just overestimate, because it's just great to give out money to people and to constituents, and they will appreciate it. And then only after you're reelected, you say, "Oh, whoops! You know, well, that didn't work out."
Ruh-roh.
But it wasn't me. It was that prior legislature
Right.
that did that. You know, at times we have to be responsible in how we cast our votes and how we bring forward legislation. It's just like the arguments that we hear about this budget. They'll point out cuts and say, well, you didn't fund this all the way, or the hospitals aren't getting all the money they should, or the developmentally disabled list isn't fully funded. And they don't continue the conversation completely, which is say, okay, if we want to put more money in this, where's the money coming from? It only comes from one of three places. Either you cut it out of some other program, you tax people more, or you borrow it.
Yeah, I know the last few years I was in before you took the reins, the amount of, it was like weekly, there was another fee.
Yeah.
I mean, weekly, every week they would be voting on a new fee increase or a new fee or a new tax.
Yeah.
They didn't like to call them new taxes, so they chose the word fee
Call it a
because
fee,
somehow
yeah.
that was more palatable.
Yeah, I remember you saying that a few weeks ago, that it was relentless.
Oh, it was
Just-
horrible.
yeah.
It was, I forget how many dozens or hundreds of fees they added in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Of,
I can give you that. It's over 100 that were specifically enacted by the legislature, and then the agencies themselves, the bureaucracy, under broad rulemaking authority that we gave them, came up with 47 more fee
Oh, that's good.
increases.
as opposed,
Wow.
yeah. The other thing I wanted to do so people understand is at the beginning of this year, you heard the relentless cry from the Democrats. Why aren't you focusing on the budget? That's what's important because we're taking up other issues.
Yeah,
And the fact of the matter is 400 legislators. There's probably 20% of which are working on the budget. The other 80% are doing things like John's in transportation, I'm in fish and game, doing all kinds of other things. But the Democrats failed to mention is when they took the reins for the first time was 2006, the first thing they did, within, I don't even think it took them 2 months, which is really quick for legislation.
yeah,
The first thing they did was eliminating parental notification. First thing
Right.
they did,
Right.
not the budget,
Right.
nothing else.
right.
It was to get rid of parental notification for children, underage children, so they get an abortion without their parents' permission.
Right.
So that's, they say one thing and then do something completely different themselves when they're in charge.
Right.
So I just want people to understand that it's not, first of all, yes, you can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
we were concentrating on the budget, which is apparent, which is obvious when you consider we had an 11% decrease in the overall budget.
Right.
If we weren't, that would not have happened.
That's right. And as you point out, there were literally scores of representatives who were working sometimes near the end of the process 6-7 days a week, looking over the accounts, taking testimony from citizens and agents, heads, working in subcommittees, closely looking at the budget to fashion one that would be fair, but again, one that wouldn't rob jobs by increasing taxes even more. In the end, private sector jobs, the middle class, is sustained by companies starting jobs and making money, not by government employing people and just taking money from citizens to do that.
Right. The other stuff I want to talk about, because that's the budget, I think is there anything else you guys want to
I
include?
just want to add that in Goffstown, my district is Goffstown and Ware, but in Goffstown, one of the selectmen asked me if I thought you weren't going to be downshifting anything to the towns, and I said, "Whoa."
Whoa, wait, stop. A lot of people listening don't even know what that means.
All right, downshifting is when the state that used to fund a particular project, used to have money there. When the state ceases to give that money to the towns, now the towns need to come up with
Oh,
that
okay.
revenue
Yeah.
if they've already promised to spend it or they've already looking for a place to put it.
Okay.
So the towns, the selectmen in Goffstown were concerned that we were now going to put them on the hook where they were going to have to increase taxes. So at that point, I didn't really answer much. I just got a hold of Representative Neil Kirk from Ware, who was on the budget. He's very knowledgeable of the budget of the state, and he was one of the people that helped to write it. So he came and spoke to the selectmen in Goffstown, and lo and behold, the answer was, you're really not going to be affected that much. This is the reason what we did as a legislature, and Goffstown won't be affected into a very small amount of money.
the budget that the governor gave us, and that by law, he's required to give us his proposal by February 15th. The budget he gave us on February 15th had $154 million of this downshifting to the towns. And understand what that would be. For
You
example,
could lay a good example, yeah.
yeah, one example is that the state has made a promise to the towns and school districts that it will assist in new construction. And there's some towns that have new construction of schools, and there's some towns that built some schools. And now that the bonds are being paid off, the state helps pay those bonds off. Towns and school districts are dependent on that. The governor chose to, in his budget, eliminate that program. We put it back into place. The state helps out in an area called catastrophic aid in education. This is for special, substantially impacted special needs children. The governor decided to do without that for 1 year, assisting the town, something that the state had traditionally did. We restored all of those
Is
payments.
reinstored a word?
Reinstored. I started to say reinstated, but restored. We restored
Good call,
that
Gary.
to the.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm paying attention a little bit.
You are paying
It's
attention.
a word now, Gary.
I thought I
is a
could
word
slip
now.
that past you there.
You are the
Gary.
Speaker of the House, so I guess it is technically a
Yeah,
word
you're-
now,
you're-
yeah.
You're challenged.
You misunderestimated him.
Yes,
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Your challenge is denied on that.
Rules Committee.
The Rules Committee. But we reinstated and also restored
Yeah.
that amount so that we could go back to the towns and say, the problem we caused at the state level, we're doing our best to not have it have an impact at the town level.
Yep. Yeah, it's an amazing Herculean.
Herculean?
Yeah, one of them tasks. And I'm glad I wasn't part of it.
Yeah, there's another. you know, there's another point I'd like to make too. That we saw in the past two budgets before this one something we'd never seen in New Hampshire before. That was borrowing money to pay current operating costs. Borrowing by state government in New Hampshire had always been in the prior to then for capital expenditures. Build a bridge is going to last 50 years. We float a bond for 30 years to pay for it. The theory being that over the 50-year period, everyone who's paying off the bond will be using the bridge. For the first time, Governor Lynch and the Democrats borrowed money just to pay for current expenses. They borrowed money from our children, our grandchildren, to pay for the government that we had today. And that is something that we were adamant that we weren't going to do, and that's not part of this budget.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
So they acted like the federal government for the first time, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
basically.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what's happening. We've heard the horror stories that just are mind-boggling to me, that of every dollar we spend on the federal level, we're borrowing 40 or 42 cents
Oh, yeah.
to do that. That's just irresponsible. That's basically living off your credit card.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And under Governor Lynch and the Democrats of 2 years ago, I remember they were actually borrowing money to pay borrowed money. I mean,
wow.
this was
Yeah.
this was not just one time. This was borrowing money to pay money that you've already borrowed on.
Right.
Yeah, and
I
it's
mean,
not
this was serious.
It's not
Wow.
hyperbole.
We were
Excuse me.
No, that's okay, Bill. I mean, we were heading off we could see the cliff.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we could see what our future was real quick, and we
Yeah.
needed to put some brakes on quick.
Yeah, you know, if you're taking out a credit card to pay off another credit card bill,
It might be an issue.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
problems there, and there were problems with the state.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it is amazing for us to hear now the discomfort and the challenge and the criticism of this budget when it's a responsible budget that lives within revenues, and the people who are criticizing won't answer the question of where are we going to get the money, because
Right.
they know their answer always was, oh, well, why don't you just overestimate revenues and borrow some money to pay current operating costs?
Yeah.
That's how we did it.
Yeah, I know the other thing too is you hear, and on a town level you hear this all the time. Our biggest, one of our big expenses in Ware is the John Stark, and what they do is a couple of years ago, what the school committee did is they proposed a budget that was very low, was a reduction. But what they did is they took the money out of sports, transportation to sports, and all this other stuff, because they knew that would motivate the soccer moms to come in at the deliberative session and save their butt. And it's the same thing on the state level, because if you look at the hospitals, they're all whining because they're not getting state as much money as they wanted. But if you look at the dang hospitals, they're building like wildfire. I mean, the populations, I moved into the state about 26 years ago, and the hospitals have quadrupled in size, and the population has maybe doubled, but I don't even think that.
No,
It's
probably
insane.
About 30% more.
You know, and they complain about not having money. The heads of the agencies complain that they don't have money for services, but you don't see them taking cuts at the agency, in the office level, or the superstructure,
level,
the administrative
yeah.
level.
Yeah.
You don't see them taking cuts or cutting staff or anything else. It's always, they gotta make sure that Bob doesn't get money for food this week.
Right.
Well, and there's just so much in politics that is smoke and mirrors, and the hospitals have chosen to engage in somewhat. We saw last week.
But what have they been smoking?
Well, we saw last week Exeter Hospital announced we're laying off 110 positions, and how do you lay off a position? Well, it turns out there's only 25 people being laid off,
Yeah.
and they were eliminating the remainder of positions. I thought only in government could you call eliminating an unfilled position a layoff. But
Right.
apparently, if you are at hospitals now, you can do that.
Yeah, well, they've learned. They pick up.
Yeah.
They pick up what we're putting down. Oh yeah. Along with that budget, people should know that there was also tax decreases, as opposed to tax increases that we talked about before over the last years.
Yeah.
We reduced the cigarette tax, which the cigarette tax is something that I've always voted against, because if you really look at the people it impacts, it's the people that are, the blue collar and less, that are the ones who are actually buying cigarettes.
Right.
So a cigarette tax is really a tax on the poor. And so we reduced that.
Makes sense.
So what we did is there'd been, I think on the state level, 4 increases in 6 years, and then there was a federal increase too. What we did was eliminate the last increase. And the reason we did that is because we'd gone past the tipping point where it's clear that cigarette sales were falling off. Not throughout New England. They were going up in all our neighboring states, but falling in New England. The cigarette revenue is our third largest source of government funding in this state. And it was clear that we were giving away, we were losing cross-border sales, and it was hurting small businesses, not just for the tobacco sales, but there's a study that shows from a few years back that shows for every dollar an out-of-state resident spends on tobacco products in New Hampshire, that same person spends $8.56 on other products. And so the only state in the country where wholesale shipments, in New England, where wholesale shipment of cigarettes was down was New Hampshire. We'd gone past the tipping point, and we decided to help out the small businesses and help with the state revenues, quite frankly,
Right.
by eliminating that last tax increase. We did it in a measured manner. We said, let's just do it for 2 years. Let's see how it works out. If we don't get more revenue in over the next 2 years, then they'll be reinstated again.
Right. And is there any feedback on how that is? Or is it-
Yes, there is. The July figures were based upon June sales, and a lot of the retailers, seeing the tax decrease coming, didn't buy the stamps. The way the revenue is generated is they
Through the
buy
stamps.
these cigarette stamps that they have to put in the packages. That was down. Then it was up quite a bit, 20% in August. It appears
that
now
kind of might be a little
there
bit-
was that up and down
Yeah.
effect, so that washes. It appears now that the first full month we've had, which is sort of a going forth month, it's up about, if I think I have the figures correctly, by $1.3 million.
That's
So
pretty-
there is an indication of an increase there.
I remember you telling us about somebody from Vermont asked us as a legislature to cut the crap because you're killing us. What was
Well,
that?
I went down to
I heard something about this.
I went down to Wellesley, I think, and spoke at a group down there, Wellesley, Mass, and spoke to a group there. And
I'm
they-
surprised they let a Republican into Wellesley, Mass.
Well, it was a group that was amenable to our
Oh, okay.
our agenda. But I was spoken there, and there was about
So you were
five.
like in a basement or something, so nobody knew.
Yeah, that's right.
Heavily guarded, I assume.
There's a guard
Yeah.
outside. But I was speaking to this group, and there were about, as it turns out, among in this group, I think it was 5 or 6 Massachusetts state representatives, and we were talking afterwards, and they said, "You guys got to cut it out. You know, you're really hurting us here.
Really?
There's no way we can follow you because we have had substantial tax decreases. We decreased." Eliminated the surcharge that had been put in place over the last budget cycle on motor vehicles. It's $30 to $75 registration surcharge, and we eliminated that. We eliminated the gambling tax, so it was basically an income tax on gambling wages because lottery commissions, commission revenues had fallen off at a rate greater than we were getting out of the tax. We told them that would happen, and it did. And so we reduced it. Some really good.
Is there any indication that that's starting to head back up because of that, or is that?
There is an indication of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a recessionary period. It's early on to tell. Lottery revenues are heavily influenced by what the take is on megabucks. I think it is. I don't buy tickets, but if you're up to the $300 million jackpot, then money really flows in. If you're at the $20 million jackpot, apparently you don't get as many sales. So it really is an up and down situation. But I met with Charlie McIntyre, who's the head of the Lottery Commission last week, and he's optimistic that he's seen the trend he wants to.
I know. One other tax decrease we had was one that was I fought 2 years ago. In the the federal government had told the state of New Hampshire that it had to impose a saltwater fishing tax license, or it was going to impose one on the people fishing off the coast of New Hampshire. Anybody who understands the Constitution at all realizes that they don't have any authority to do that. The federal government has the authority to regulate commerce.
Right.
Like, in other words, if you got a fishing fleet that's pulling in X number of tons of cod, they do have authority to regulate that kind of commerce because it's going to be brought on shore in New Hampshire and then sold in Massachusetts. That's commerce.
Sure.
But if I'm off pier in Portsmouth fishing with my grandson, that's not commerce.
Right, of course.
And they have no right to regulate it. So under the Constitution, they have no right to especially within that 3-mile limit, to actually regulate what New Hampshire fishermen do if they're just recreational fishing.
Yeah.
And so I fought that tooth and nail, but the Democrats let that in, and it was a $15 saltwater fishing. In addition to your regular fishing license, it was a $15 increase.
Huh.
I didn't get what I wanted, which was to eliminate it completely,
Right.
but it was dropped down from $15 to $11. So that
Oh,
was,
wow. Hey.
that's still, when taxes have been increasing over the last 4 years, seeing them start going down again is pretty amazing.
Right.
Especially in this economy.
Well,
Yeah.
and we either eliminated or reduced 13 taxes.
Yeah.
Certainly that's one of them. One of the favorite ones that's somewhat symbolic, but I think it is a good message to send to the retailers, is we eliminated a fee that retailers have to pay in order to get the authority to charge a meals and room tax. So if we would charge them
try that
money.
for-
We would charge them money to be a collector of taxes for us.
Right.
And we thought this is sort of absurd. So we just eliminated that. Not a substantial impact on businesses.
Sure.
I think it was.
Wait. Let me just back up. So it was a fee that they had to pay for collecting taxes for us.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And
That's creative. You got to admit that's creative.
Yeah, it is that.
I mean,
yeah.
I
I didn't know that ever
You and I
existed.
probably had conversations over the last term where we'd see some of these fees that, you're right, came every week, and we'd go, who could have thought of that?
Right,
And
right.
It's something like that. Everything that moves, they were charging a fee.
I remember picking on one of the representatives from Hillsborough, because they were going to come up with a fee for every 55-gallon drum of oil or whatever it is. And I got to the floor. Says, you have one of the biggest big manufacturer in your town there in Hillsborough, Sylvania. They've got hundreds and hundreds of gallons of oil around because you use
Right.
it for cutting oil, you use it for all.
Sure.
How much is it going to cost them? Oh, I don't know, but it's a good idea to charge this fees. And he has no clue how that's going to impact how many.
Right.
Maybe Sylvania would have to lay off a dozen people to pay for that fee. But
Right.
he has no clue because it seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
And that's what's more important.
New Hampshire is blessed by not having a sales tax and not having an income tax on wages and salaries. But that has meant that over time that we've gone to our businesses too often, and with too many fees and too many taxes. And we have, by some estimates, the highest corporate taxes in the country.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
That surprises me,
It,
really.
it does, except when you realize that, if you're not going to be getting money out of one of these big, robust taxes, then you have to start engaging in this behavior that we've seen. And you're right, John, just not from Democrats over the last 4 years, although certainly from Democrats the last 4 years, but also prior Republican legislators and governors who have just said, well, let's impose a fee on that, maybe we'll get $2 million out of that fee, and they've just been really creative, and they made a business environment that is not the New Hampshire that I knew when I was a child. And I lived in Massachusetts when I was a child.
You're not
and
supposed to admit that. by the
Well,
way.
that's fine. But as a child and a younger man, and I remember as a young man that the intelligent move for a business in Massachusetts was to go to New Hampshire.
Sure.
And I think we're losing that advantage
Really?
now.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when you go look at the highway going south in the morning, it's much more crowded going south than it is
Sure,
coming
sure.
north because the jobs are in Massachusetts and they're not here
Yeah.
anymore.
One other thing I wanted to touch on before, because we're going to run out of time, is one of the bills that was near and dear to your heart, being from Mount Vernon, that was they wouldn't even allow us. The Rules Committee wouldn't even allow it in last term.
Right.
They claimed that it was, they came up with some excuses why they didn't want it in. The reason they didn't really want this particular legislation in is because it was going to make the Democrats look bad when they voted against it,
Yeah,
which
well,
was the reality of the situation. But anyway,
Sure. Back in October 2009, a neighbor of mine was killed by some young men who broke into her house. And the circumstance of her death were just horrifying. It occurred 1 week after the bill filing period had closed.
yeah,
And now there is a procedure in the legislature then and now, and most legislatures have that, saying, well, if you can't file a bill, if something additional has happened, something new's happened, that would essentially excuse the fact that you didn't file this
you
earlier.
didn't file it because you didn't think of
Okay.
there wasn't evidence that you would need it.
Right, okay.
Right. And
Right.
so, I talked with some of my neighbors, and I talked with Kimberly Cates, survivors, and we thought it appropriate to bring forward a bill that would make it a capital offense, an offense that would be punishable by the death sentence, to purposely invade someone's house with the intent to kill them. Because that was one situation where we all should be safe. We all go to bed at night and we close our eyes, we go to sleep, and we shouldn't have to wake up as did Kimberly Cates with someone hacking her to
Yeah,
death.
absolutely.
And so we went in front of the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee, which was dominated by the other party at the time, said, no, we don't think we're going to let it in. Now, there's an option that you can go to the House floor as a New Hampshire state representative and go in front of the House and say, I disagree with what's happening, and specifically I disagree with the ruling of the Rules Committee. And I did that, and I offered to the House, all the members, an opportunity to overrule the Rules Committee and at least allow us to bring in the bill so we could debate it, whether this is an appropriate extension of the New Hampshire death sentence statute. And their response to that was, Oh, well, you should have known this happened because the Xantoffs, I think they were murdered in the Hanover area about 8, 9 years ago by home invaders, similar to a couple of young men who I think posed as best can be figured out as the car breakdown or something
I
like
don't
that,
know.
and they went in there and murdered this retired couple. And so that was their argument, that we won't allow you to bring it in because nothing new's happened here.
Right.
And so we didn't debate it last term. Same legislation was filed this term. I filed it, and it is now law.
Right.
It was passed by both houses in the legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives, I think with pretty good margins, and Governor Lynch signed it, which I think is justice, and it's a substantial protection of people. They have a right to know that the one place that you have respite and sanctuary is your home.
Right.
Absolutely.
What's that? What? My list of.
Gary,
No, don't care.
while you're reading, I just want to say that in the Transportation Committee, as I was sitting there this year and bills would come in that had been proposed, anything that had a fee or tax increase on it was pretty much
DOA.
DOA if I could, have anything to do with that. And luckily, most of the other committee members and the legislature also felt the same way.
Yeah, we're
So
doing the same thing.
if-
Fish and game. There was I forget. I forget what representative came. Was one bill that there was going to be increase in one of the fishing licenses or something. I says,
If any bill comes in the
you
next,
you can do what you want, but this ain't it's not flying.
right, any new taxes, any fee increases, any
So-
taxes that come in to this next time, we'll do the same thing. There will be none, hopefully, in this 2 years that I'm staying.
And the thing is, the Democrats understood we meant business, so that same representative went back and negotiated and tried to come up with some sort of compromise where they could get what they wanted without the increase, which was a pretty effective. We didn't end up with anything out of Fish and Game that was an increase in
Right.
fees.
No, we said what we were going to do, and everybody was aware of how severe that we took the problem to be, and
Right.
we've done what we said we were going to do, and like it or not, we didn't change our mind.
Right.
We've done what we said we were going to do at the time. of the
I
election.
never change my mind unless my wife tells me to.
Yeah, that's a
You
good
know,
policy.
yeah.
It is.
It is,
It's good discretion on your part. there.
Yeah, I'm pretty smart. Fella.
I've never been married, so I don't know what to think most of the time. I'm just
No,
kind
no.
of aimless.
You'll-
I go into
You'll
stores.
find out.
I go into
Just ask Gary.
stores. I
Yeah.
go into stores. People say, "How you doing?" I said, "I don't know. My wife hasn't told me yet."
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Parental notification got through this year.
How about some of these veto overrides? How about some of these vetoes?
SB 88. We overrode
We
that
overrode-
last week. I think I
yeah.
talked about that last week, so
I-
that you don't have to try to figure out how you're going to escape from the situation. You can actually defend yourself
Right.
I still
Right.
hope
instead
that
of turning your back.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
still hope we can override this veto, override the veto to continue the rail authority. That's one that I look forward to. Hopefully, the House has the numbers to do that.
Yeah, and that's something that John has worked very hard on and very effectively on. And just to outline it, if I might, for your viewers, there's a proposal to spend upwards to $300 million to upgrade the line from Lowell to Nashua to allow for passenger rail service. It appears, based upon some unverified figures put out by the Rail Transit Authority, that there may well be 2,000 commuters a day who use it. They also agree that there's going to be between 8 and 12 million a year in deficits. Without being too facetious, but trying to illustrate the problem, we could take that $300 million and give it back to the federal government and just take the $12 million a year and hire a bunch of limousines and run those commuters down to Lowell. The figures are overly ambitious. It's not something that has worked out anywhere without a substantial and ongoing subsidy. All you have to look at is Massachusetts' experience with the MBTA and the horrible deficits that have resulted over the years. And that's in an urban area. We're not as urbanized as as Massachusetts is. And it's clear that if we're trying to push mass transit alternatives, that buses are much more efficient. Buses can be run for about a third of the cost of railroads. You know, and that would, even if we mandated that we put railroad whistles on the buses so we can have the romanticism of the railroad.
Oh, that's a good idea. How
And-
fun.
And that would still, I think it'd still be substantially cheaper than.
Screw up the
than-
suspension so
you
you
know,
still get that choo choo.
Right, right.
you know,
Yeah.
this is a this is a this is
Come
a
together
bad
by the bumpers.
this is a real bad proposal,
Yeah.
and it's moving forward, and they're putting together a whole bureaucracy surrounding it. John has managed to get through both the Senate and the House legislation to stop it now before more
Yeah.
money is wasted. The governor vetoed it, and that's
Really?
one of the vetoes that we have to take up.
And people out there, talk to your representatives and senators, make sure, or your representatives, make sure we can override this veto. I think it's an important issue. The Downeaster in Maine, they are proud that it only loses $12 million a year. That's a milestone for them. They're happy in Maine
Wow.
that's all they have to
Right,
subsidize
right.
is $12 million, and they're trying to increase the size of the Downeaster rail right now,
Yeah.
knowing it's going to cost more money. We're going to be subsidizing this rail into the future. We'd have no idea when they say that we can lose between $8 and $12 million a year. If I know government, I'm going to say we're going to lose $16 to $24 million
Right.
a year, because I can always double. I'll double the
Sure.
bad news, and I'll
Sure.
half the good news.
Well, by government standards, that's a success.
It's
Yeah.
a real success.
It well might be, but you know, our obligation as state representatives is to protect the state finances. Now,
That's
I've
a lot of
told-
money for 2,000 people who are going to ride it.
It really is,
Yeah.
and that's highly theoretical, because if you
Yeah.
look at the survey, it was sort of getting people who had just finished commute, say, would you rather have taken a train on that trip? Oh, sure, yeah, right, great, I'd be glad to. But does that mean they're actually going to use it? Because most of us these days don't go on our daily business from point A to point B. We go from point A to D, and then we're
Sure.
going to B, and then we have to stop off at E on the way back to A.
Absolutely.
It just would not work.
We love our automobiles. We like the flexibility and the freedom of leaving home when we want and arriving somewhere and maybe stopping along the way
Oh, yeah.
at a whole bunch of places that we either planned or didn't plan on being to. In a rail, you're stuck on one line,
Sure.
going in one direction, and there's no variation of that unless you get off and
Right.
plan on walking.
Absolutely.
As fun as it would be to ride the train, boy, I just don't think we can I still don't think we can afford it.
Not for that price tag, no.
It's going to cost every citizen of New Hampshire hundreds of dollars a year, whether they use it or not.
Right.
Now, I've certainly let it be known to the city of Nashua, which is where the train would end, and there's a great deal of support there, that if they want to have that $8 to $12 million a year deficit, I wouldn't stand in the way of this. I think as a federal taxpayer along with a state taxpayer, I'm a little concerned that money would be spent this way. But, you know, we'll back off. They're not rushing to take up that
They could
obligation.
bring
Yeah.
it to Nashua, and that would be what they wanted to do.
Right.
And
Right.
they'd have what they want, but they want the rest of the state to
Right.
pay for.
Yeah, people in Plymouth
They
don't
want.
need this.
Right.
The people out in Hanover and North Country don't need this.
Yeah, of course.
No, I
Yeah.
tried to get it, I tried to actually support the rail thing if they could have the one going from Boston all the way to Canada be diverted for like an overnight stay in Ware, but that didn't take root, so no, I'm not supporting it.
You could open like a
you
bed
go.
and breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Does Ware want the deficit too? Or
No. But I did want to confess something. I a lot of times I say stuff and I don't mean to offend people up at the legislature. You know me, I try to just be a nice guy, and I was at my committee talk. I went into my committee room, the office, and one of the Democrats and my committee assistant was talking, and they were talking about hotels. And they were saying that they really like to stay at nicer hotels because they know that the place has been taken care of, it's clean, and then when they lay down on the bed's been changed and everything
Sure.
else. And I like to enter into a conversation as well. I know when I'm out on my motorcycle, sometimes I want to rest for just like an hour or so because it wears on you. So I always go to places that rent by the hour. I didn't know that was offensive. personally, you know what I mean?
Right, right.
You know, because my dad was a Marine, and you know, it was very, very puritanical type situation. So I
Yes, yes.
guess that's offensive because the ladies were very aghast and offended. And I don't know what you want to say. Should I apologize in front of the house for that one, or
Yeah, no need for that, Gary.
no? 'Cause I
You
would,
know, you
because
can
I feel
apologize
so.
for many other things.
I feel so.
You don't need.
Yeah, we have a whole
I
list.
feel so
of-
badly.
That would go at the bottom of it.
That's a bottom.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
best to leave things in the past and just not bring them up again, you know? Let sleeping dogs lie.
No, I don't do that.
Last night I was actually having a nightmare, and I dreamt that Hillary Clinton is going to be running for president, and John Lynch is going to be running as her vice president.
Oh.
That was a nightmare. I mean, that was a.
That is something you should apologize to.
That
the
was,
House.
maybe I will
So
apologize.
you
for
didn't hear that on
that.
MSNBC.
So,
That was just
so,
a straight.
so my prediction for 2012 was a Clinton Lynch
Right.
ticket.
All right.
Democrat side.
We gotta start to wrap up.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have to start. We've actually increased Liberty in the last this session. Anything coming up next year that you want to talk about in the next 20 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to, again, look at the pension, public employee pension system. That's going to be an ongoing problem. We've done some work on it now. We've achieved some results there. We're going to have to look at the constitutional amendments that are on the table for education funding to cap the legislature's ability to increase taxes and increase borrowing, requiring a 60% vote. There's a lot of great legislation that's coming forward that is really going to provide a foundation, a strong foundation for what we have known as the New Hampshire advantage of limited government, personal responsibility, liberty, and support of our families.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John. And it's Bill, right? Yeah, Speaker O'Brien.
Bill.
And I just
I
hope
thought
I
he knew
can,
me.
I hope I can count on your support for my legislation, Fish and Game, which I talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is hand grenade hunting for white-tailed deer in New Hampshire. I think it's the way to go.
Sounds exciting.
Oh, yeah, it'll be wicked exciting.
Yeah.
It'd be explosive.
I mean, I don't
so-
fish, but I would do that.
No,
I
well,
would
we're
that.
doing fishing next time.
Okay.
Fishing next time.
All right.
Did I
You want to give white-tailed deer hand grenades?
No.
Oh, that would even the odds.
Did I make this guy chairman of the Fish and Game Committee?
Yes.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, everybody.